It began with a silence that felt wrong. No announcement, no ceremony, no warning. Then suddenly an internal royal directive, quietly leaked, detonated across the world. Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales, had allegedly stripped Princess Beatrice of her succession rights. No explanation, no context, just removal. And behind that silence, something far more dangerous was hiding. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The shock was not merely about the decision itself, it was about the method. In a monarchy bound by ritual and tradition, nothing simply disappears. Titles are inherited, positions are defined by centuries of precedent, and even scandals are managed with carefully worded restraint. Yet this felt surgical, deliberate, almost cold. The removal of a royal from the line of succession without a public explanation is not just rare, it is virtually unheard of in modern times. And that is what made it explosive. There was no balcony appearance, no press briefing from Buckingham Palace, no attempt to soften the blow with diplomatic language, just a quiet internal document slipped into the bloodstream of the press, and then chaos. Palace insiders were quick to whisper that this was not a reactionary measure. It was calculated, they said. A decision weighed, measured, and executed with precision. That single word, calculated, sent chills through royal watchers across the globe. Because calculated implies strategy, it implies planning. It implies that whatever led to this moment had been unfolding long before the public ever sensed it. And then came the question that echoed louder with every passing hour. Why now? Why strip Princess Beatrice of her succession rights at this exact moment in history, when the monarchy is already navigating generational change, shifting public opinion, and mounting pressure to modernize? Timing in royal politics is never accidental. Every gesture carries meaning, every silence carries even more. And then there was the eerie absence of King Charles III from the narrative. No endorsement, no visible opposition, no statement. For a reigning monarch to remain publicly detached from such a seismic internal shift raised eyebrows instantly. Was this his decision, quietly endorsed behind closed doors? Or was this a move initiated by William and Catherine as they steadily shape the monarchy's future in their own image? The lack of clarity only deepened the intrigue. It felt as though power lines were being redrawn within the palace itself, subtly but unmistakably. Speculation surged almost immediately that this removal was tied to something far more serious than a family disagreement. Anonymous sources began hinting at a long-running internal investigation. The phrase was vague enough to protect the institution, but loaded enough to ignite suspicion. An investigation into what? Financial conduct, associations, confidential breaches. The palace refused to clarify, and that refusal became its own kind of confession. In royal history, silence has always been a shield, but it can also become a weapon. Meanwhile, the public facade remained eerily intact. Official engagements continued, smiles were maintained, appearances were upheld with polished grace. But beneath that surface composure, insiders described a different reality, one of urgent meetings, hushed conversations, and private anxieties. The monarchy has always been a masterclass in composure under pressure, yet this felt different. This felt like containment, like damage control. And the contrast between the calm exterior and the internal tremors only heightened the sense that something monumental was at stake. Because removing someone from the line of succession is not just administrative, it is symbolic. It is a statement about trust, about legitimacy, about who belongs in the future of the crown and who does not. And when that kind of decision is made without public reasoning, it doesn't quiet the storm, it fuels it. The world was left staring at a vacuum of information, and into that vacuum poured fear, rumor, and relentless speculation. But what the world didn't yet understand was this. This wasn't a sudden decision. It was the final move in a quiet, months-long investigation that had been unfolding behind palace walls. Long before the world heard whispers of removal, something far more unsettling was already in motion. Files were being compiled, conversations recorded, movements tracked, quietly, meticulously. A royal investigation allegedly authorized by Prince William himself was unfolding in total secrecy. And, At its center, Princess Beatrice. The question wasn't just what she did, but how long they had been watching her. What now appears sudden was, in truth, the final act of a process that had been building in silence for months. According to palace insiders, what began as a routine internal compliance review slowly evolved into something far more pointed. Officially, it was framed as modernization, an effort to ensure that all senior royals met evolving standards of transparency and accountability in a changing constitutional landscape. Unofficially, it became clear that the scrutiny was not evenly distributed. It was narrowing, and it was narrowing around Beatrice. Trusted aides who had once worked comfortably within her orbit were quietly reassigned. At first, the changes appeared administrative staff rotations, temporary restructuring, harmless reshuffling within the household. But behind the courtesy of royal protocol, those shifts carried intention. Individuals known for loyalty were replaced with those known for discretion and analytical precision. Meetings were documented with unusual thoroughness. Travel patterns were logged with unexpected detail. Even seemingly minor social engagements began to attract internal review. It was not loud, it was not accusatory, it was something more chilling, methodical. Financial links and social connections were placed under careful examination, not accusations, not charges, just questions. Questions about partnerships, questions about affiliations, questions about proximity to figures who existed on the blurred edge between influence and controversy. The monarchy, already under pressure to project integrity in a digital age that tolerates no opacity, could not afford the perception of vulnerability. And as whispers of external influences began circulating within palace corridors, anxiety replaced patience. The concern was not necessarily criminality, it was exposure. Exposure, Rita networks to narratives, to reputational risks that could metastasize in the modern media ecosystem. Catherine's reported role in all of this only intensified the gravity of the moment. Calm, analytical, precise. Those who understand her public composure often underestimate her internal resolve. Sources described her not as emotional or reactive, but as deeply involved, reviewing findings, asking pointed questions, insisting on clarity. If William was the architect of the review, Catherine was said to be its quiet strategist. Together, they represented a future-facing monarchy, one determined to protect its foundation at any cost. And that cost, increasingly, appeared personal. What started as an inquiry into one royal's conduct began expanding outward. The circle widened, associates were examined, advisors scrutinized, long-standing friendships quietly reassessed. The investigation was no longer confined to Princess Beatrice alone, it was radiating into her inner circle, mapping connections like threads in an intricate web. Each discovery, no matter how minor, fed a growing sense of unease. Because in royal politics, perception can be more damaging than proof. And the palace was not merely chasing evidence, it was attempting to prevent a future scandal before it ever ignited. Inside the institution, tension grew thick. Some viewed the investigation as necessary discipline in a modern monarchy striving for credibility. Others saw it as a dangerous overreach, a consolidation of influence by William and Catherine, as they gradually redefine royal authority. Loyalty was tested, allegiances quietly shifted. Conversations that once flowed freely became guarded. Every whisper carried weight. Every glance felt measured, and beneath it all lingered a single, unsettling truth. This was no longer just about compliance. It was about control. It was about shaping the monarchy's future by deciding who was fit to stand within it. And as the investigation deepened, what began as quiet suspicion soon escalated into something far more explosive, something that would divide the royal family itself. At first, it was dismissed as gossip, whispers of tension, subtle distance, a change in tone. But then came the first undeniable signs: invitations withdrawn, meetings cancelled, eyes avoiding eye contact. Princess Beatrice was no longer being treated as family, but as a liability. And someone inside the palace had already decided she couldn't be trusted. The shift was not dramatic or public, it was quiet, surgical, the kind of isolation that begins politely and ends decisively. One by one, key royal engagements that once bore her name quietly removed it. Appearances she had anticipated were reassigned. Seating arrangements changed. schedules altered. Officially, there were always explanations, logistics, strategy, modernization, but behind those explanations was something colder, deliberate exclusion. Reports began circulating of strained exchanges between Beatrice and Prince William, moments where conversations felt less like family dialogue and more like interrogation masked as concern. William, increasingly defined by his sense of institutional duty, was said to have adopted a tone that was firm, unyielding. This was not a cousin speaking, it was a future king protecting the crown, and Beatrice felt it. The warmth that once defined their interactions had cooled into formal distance. Every word carried weight, every pause felt loaded. What had once been shared laughter now felt like measured diplomacy. Catherine's growing silence spoke even louder. She did not criticize. She did not defend. She simply observed. For many within palace circles, that silence was interpreted as quiet approval of the tightening boundaries around Beatrice. Catherine had built her public identity on composure and grace, but behind that composure was discernment. If she disagreed, some believed she would have intervened. Her stillness signaled alignment, and in royal politics, alignment is power. Internal warnings were allegedly issued to senior royals, subtle reminders about protocol, about discretion, about maintaining collective integrity. The language was neutral, but the target felt unmistakable. Those within Beatrice's immediate circle sensed the shift. Calls became shorter, invitations more cautious. Advisors who once offered reassurance began offering restraint. The message was not shouted, but it was clear: tread carefully. The monarchy was entering protective mode. For Beatrice, confusion slowly morphed into defensiveness. She questioned decisions. She sought clarity. She pushed back gently at first, then with more urgency. How could she defend herself against something that had not been formally articulated? There were no charges, no public accusations. Just a tightening perimeter. That uncertainty became suffocating. To be sidelined without explanation is a unique form of exile, especially within a family bound by blood and symbolism. And as her frustration grew, so did the fractures within the royal structure. Quiet factions began to form. Some believed William's caution was necessary, a bold step towards safeguarding a modern monarchy in an unforgiving era. Others saw cruelty in the process, a cold prioritization of optics over loyalty. Long-standing alliances felt the strain. Conversations behind closed doors carried sharper edges. The institution that prides itself on unity was beginning to reveal its fault lines. What made it more volatile was the unspoken reality. Once suspicion enters a royal household, it does not simply fade. It embeds, it reshapes relationships. Trust, once questioned, rarely returns untouched. And while Beatrice struggled to piece together why her world was narrowing around her, others within the palace were already bracing for escalation. Because investigations can be managed, exclusions can be explained, but betrayal, real or perceived, has a way of igniting consequences no one can fully control. But while Beatrice struggled to understand what was happening, others already knew the truth, and they weren't staying silent for long. The palace was no longer united, it was splitting. Quiet alliances were forming. Conversations were happening behind closed doors. Some believed Princess Beatrice was being unfairly targeted, while others feared the investigation hadn't gone far enough. And at the center of it all stood Prince William, not as a prince, but as a decision-maker, willing to risk everything. The monarchy, long sustained by the illusion of seamless unity, was beginning to reveal its fractures. What had once been subtle discomfort was now undeniable division. Senior royals, bound by duty yet divided by belief, found themselves choosing sides in a battle that was no longer private. Within those gilded walls, opinions hardened. There were those who argued that Beatrice had become a convenient symbol, an easy figure to discipline in order to project strength and reform. They warned that targeting her without transparent justification could damage the very credibility the monarchy was trying to protect. To them, this felt personal, excessive, a sacrifice made not out of necessity, but strategy. Others, however, viewed the situation through a colder lens. They believed caution had been delayed for too long, that the crown, already bruised by past controversies, could not afford even the smallest vulnerability. In their view, William's firmness was not betrayal, it was survival. Sarah Ferguson reportedly emerged as one of the most vocal defenders of her daughter, fierce, unapologetic, protective. She was said to have challenged the narrative quietly, but forcefully, insisting that Beatrice was being judged through a distorted filter shaped by old wounds and inherited suspicion, because no matter how much the monarchy evolves, history lingers, and in this case, the shadow of Prince Andrew loomed heavily over every discussion. His past controversies had left scars on the institution, and whether fair or not, those scars influenced perception. For some within the palace, Beatrice's lineage complicated the equation. It wasn't just about her actions, it was about optics, legacy, and the fear of repeating history. Younger royals, sensing the volatility of the moment, began creating distance, not openly, not dramatically, but subtly enough to be noticed. Appearances became more independent, statements more carefully worded. Association, in times of uncertainty, can be dangerous. No one wanted to be perceived as aligning too strongly with either side of an internal conflict that could reshape the monarchy's future. Self-preservation quietly guided behavior. Through it all, Catherine maintained her measured composure. Those close to the situation described her as stabilizing but unwavering. She did not inflame tensions, nor did she soften William's stance. Instead, she reinforced it with calm assurance. Where others reacted emotionally, she remained deliberate. Her presence lent credibility to the decisions being made. If William was facing mounting internal pressure to either reverse course or escalate the consequences, Catherine's quiet strength became both shield and anchor. Together, they projected unity at the top, even as unity below them fractured. The pressure on William intensified. Senior advisors warned that hesitation would appear weak. Others cautioned that harshness would fracture the family beyond repair. Every path forward carried risk. To act decisively could cement his authority, but deepen division. To retreat could signal doubt. For the first time, he was not merely preparing to inherit leadership, he was exercising it in real time, under scrutiny, under tension, under the weight of legacy. What made the atmosphere combustible was the growing sense that the investigation had not yet reached its conclusion. Whispers hinted at findings still under review, at information not yet disclosed even to some senior figures. The factions were arguing over incomplete knowledge, and when power struggles unfold in partial darkness, suspicion grows faster than truth. Alliances solidified, patience thinned. The monarchy stood at a crossroads, defined not by ceremony, but by confrontation. And then, just as tensions reached a breaking point, the investigation uncovered something that changed everything. It wasn't supposed to be found, or at least not yet. But buried within months of quiet surveillance and fragmented reports was a discovery so alarming. It forced immediate action. Suddenly, hesitation vanished, debate ended, and Prince William made a decision that would alter the royal line forever. Whatever had been uncovered, it was serious enough to justify removal. Those who had seen the internal briefing described a shift in tone the moment the final pages were reviewed. What had once been theoretical risk became tangible threat. What had been whispers hardened into warning. The alleged evidence pointed toward what insiders carefully labeled compromising associations, not crimes, not formal accusations, but relationships that, when viewed through the unforgiving lens of modern scrutiny, carry dangerous implications. Connections to individuals whose reputations were unstable, engagements that blurred the boundary between royal duty and private influence. In another era, such associations might have been dismissed as peripheral, but this was not another era. The monarchy was navigating a world where perception travels faster than fact, and one careless link could spiral into irreversible damage. Concerns about reputational risk dominated the discussions. Advisors reportedly warned that even the suggestion of questionable proximity could ignite media storms capable of overwhelming the institution's carefully curated stability. The crown survives on trust, not just constitutional authority, but symbolic integrity. And if that integrity appears compromised, even indirectly, the consequences extend beyond one individual. They threaten the entire structure. For William, the choice was no longer about family comfort. It was about safeguarding a legacy he would one day inherit fully. Catherine, steady and unflinching, was said to have voiced a simple but resolute stance. Protect the institution, above all. Those words carried weight. She understood the emotional cost, she understood the optics, but she also understood that hesitation could be fatal. In moments like this, her influence did not manifest in dramatics, it manifested in clarity. If there was doubt before, it evaporated in the face of what they now knew. The investigation had shifted. It was no longer an inquiry seeking answers, it had become a crisis, demanding containment. Urgent private meetings followed in rapid succession. Senior advisors were summoned, legal implications reviewed, constitutional boundaries assessed. There was no appetite for spectacle, but there was no room, feet for delay. The monarchy has always preferred quiet corrections over public confrontations. Yet this time, quiet management felt insufficient. The longer uncertainty lingered, the greater the exposure risk became. Every hour of inaction carried its own danger. And then came the moment, subtle, decisive, irreversible. William made the call, not impulsively, not emotionally, but with the calculated resolve of someone who understood the magnitude of what he was about to set in motion. Removing a member of the royal line is not symbolic housekeeping. It is a declaration, a line drawn between privilege and accountability. A statement that even blood does not guarantee permanence. Those present described his tone as controlled, but heavy. He knew the personal cost, he knew the fracture it would deepen, but he also knew that waiting longer could fracture something far more enduring. In that instant, debate ceased to matter. The factions within the palace, who had argued for caution, found themselves confronted with finality. The defenders of Beatrice understood that whatever had been uncovered was no longer theoretical, it had crossed a threshold, and as preparations began to formalize the removal, one truth became undeniable. The monarchy had entered a new phase, one where internal discipline would outweigh familial sentiment. But removing a royal isn't just a decision, it's a confrontation, and that confrontation would become one of the most explosive moments in modern royal history. No cameras, no press, just a room and a truth that could no longer be avoided. Princess Beatrice was summoned, and across from her sat Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales not as family, but as judges of her future. What followed wasn't just a conversation, it was a reckoning. The air inside that private meeting was said to feel heavier than any public ceremony, heavier than any state occasion, because this was not about tradition, it was about consequence. Blood ties were present, but so was authority, and authority, in that moment, overpowered sentiment. For Beatrice, the weight of the summons alone signaled gravity. Royal families do not convene urgent closed-door discussions without purpose. She entered knowing the distance had grown, knowing the investigation had intensified, but still holding on to the fragile hope that explanation might soften the outcome, that reason might prevail over suspicion. Yet from the first exchange, it became clear this was not an exploratory dialogue, it was a declaration. William reportedly spoke first, calm, direct, stripped of the warmth that once defined cousinly familiarity. His tone carried the unmistakable edge of someone who had already wrestled with the decision privately. He outlined the findings without dramatics, without accusation, but with finality, associations that posed unacceptable risk, patterns that could not be ignored. The institution's vulnerability laid bare. To those who later heard whispers of the meeting, his authority felt almost unrecognizable. This was not hesitation. This was leadership forged in pressure. Beatrice allegedly pushed back, not with fury, but with disbelief. She questioned interpretations. She challenged the severity of the conclusions. Associations, she argued, did not equate to wrongdoing. Perception should not outweigh loyalty. The monarchy had endured storms before. Why was she being positioned as the epicenter of a hypothetical one? Her voice, steady at first, reportedly trembled as realization dawned. This was not negotiation, it was notification. Catherine's presence throughout the exchange remained composed but immovable. She did not interrupt unnecessarily, she did not escalate emotion. But when she spoke, her words reinforced the gravity of the moment. Protecting the institution, she emphasized, was not optional. It was essential. Public trust was fragile. The future of the crown demanded vigilance. Her calmness was not indifference, it was conviction, and that conviction carried as much weight as William's authority. Then came the turning point, the moment Beatrice understood that the decision had already been made before she entered the room. The meeting was not to determine her fate, it was to communicate it. The finality settled like a cold realization. Whatever defense she offered, whatever context she provided, the outcome would not shift. Trust, once fractured at that level, had not been restored. It had been recalculated. Inside that room, something intangible broke. Not just a procedural bond, but a familial one. The ease that once existed between them dissolved under the strain of institutional survival. William, in choosing duty over relationship, had crossed a threshold from which there was no retreat. Beatrice, in recognizing her diminished standing, felt the quiet sting of exclusion formalized. Catherine's unwavering composure underscored that this was not emotional impulse, it was deliberate resolve. When the meeting concluded, there were no raised voices echoing through corridors, no theatrical exits, only silence, but that silence carried more weight than any public confrontation could have. Because once a royal line is altered internally, the external announcement becomes inevitable. And once the confrontation ended, there was no going back. Only one final step remained, the act that would send shockwaves across the world. It didn't come with fanfare, no royal balcony, no formal address, just a quiet, calculated confirmation that changed everything. Princess Beatrice was no longer in line. The decision, driven by Prince William and supported by Catherine, Princess of Wales, marked one of the most unprecedented moments in modern monarchy, and it left the world asking one question: what happens next? The announcement arrived not as a thunderclap, but as a controlled release, an update to official records, a subtle revision to the line of succession that spoke louder than any televised speech. In a system built on centuries of ritual, the absence of ceremony felt intentional. This was not spectacle, it was strategy. The mechanics behind such a removal are complex, layered within constitutional frameworks and royal protocols rarely discussed in public. Altering the succession is not a casual act. It requires legal consultation, institutional backing, and a coordinated alignment between advisors and sovereign authority. Though King Charles III remained publicly silent, the change could not have occurred without his formal acknowledgement. That silence, too, became part of the narrative. The palace did not explain, it did not justify, it simply confirmed, and in doing so, it created a vacuum where clarity should have been. That vacuum filled instantly. Global media ignited with speculation. Analysts dissected timelines. Commentators debated motives. Social platforms flooded with theories, some sympathetic, others scathing. Was this a necessary act of modernization, a bold step toward safeguarding the monarchy's future? Or was it a ruthless consolidation of influence by a future king determined to reshape the institution in his own image? The absence of explanation only sharpened the divide. Public reaction fractured along emotional lines. Supporters argued that accountability must extend even to those born into privilege. They praised William's decisiveness, seeing it as evidence of strength and foresight. Critics, however, questioned the opacity of the move. Without transparency, suspicion thrives. And suspicion, once seeded, spreads quickly. For some, Beatrice became a symbol of perceived injustice or royal casualty, sacrificed to protect optics. For others, she represented risk the monarchy could no longer afford. Yet despite the turbulence, the royal image did not collapse. It wavered, it absorbed impact, but it held. That resilience was no accident. For generations, the crown has survived abdications, scandals, and public doubt by adapting, sometimes painfully, to preserve continuity. This moment, though dramatic, was framed internally as evolution rather than crisis. A recalibration, a tightening of standards in an era where scrutiny is relentless and memory is permanent. Within palace corridors, however, the weight of the decision lingered. Removing a name from succession does not erase relationships. It alters them. The institution may project steadiness, but families are not immune to consequence. Every choice reverberates through private spaces long after headlines fade. William had asserted authority in a way few heirs before him dared. Catherine had stood firmly beside him. Together, they signaled that the future monarchy would prioritize institutional survival over inherited comfort. But history teaches a quiet truth. Decisive acts redefine eras. This was more than an administrative adjustment, it was a declaration of how power would be exercised moving forward. The monarchy had stepped into unfamiliar territory, choosing firmness over familiarity, precision over tradition, and while the world debated the righteousness of the decision, the internal landscape was shifting beneath their feet. Because public confirmation is only the beginning. The real test of such a move lies not in the announcement, but in its aftermath. But while the world debated the decision, the real consequences were only just beginning to unfold behind palace walls. The silence returned, but this time it carried weight. The kind that lingers, the kind that changes every hing. Princess Beatrice was gone from the line, but not from the story. Because decisions like this don't end scandals, they create new ones. And within the monarchy, the question was no longer what had happened, but what would happen next. The formal announcement had been brief, almost clinical, yet its emotional aftershock stretched far beyond the official statement. Beatrice's name may have been removed from succession, but her presence still echoed through private halls and unspoken conversations. Exclusion from the line did not erase blood, history, or memory. It simply altered the script and left her future suspended in uncertainty. Rumors of isolation began to circulate quietly, reduced appearances, fewer public engagements, a visible withdrawal from the rhythms of royal life, whether self-imposed or subtly encouraged. The distance felt profound. For someone raised within the architecture of monarchy, separation is not just logistical, it is existential. Identity, purpose, relevance all tied to proximity to the crown. Now that proximity had shifted, and in that shift a void formed. Supporters whispered sympathy, critics speculated consequences. But no one knew what role, if any, she would play moving forward. Inside the family, tension did not dissipate with the announcement. It settled into something heavier, an uneasy recalibration of relationships. Conversations became cautious, gatherings more restrained. The fracture that had formed during the investigation did not vanish simply because the decision was finalized. It lingered. Those who had defended Beatrice felt the sting of defeat. Those who supported William's resolve carried the quiet burden of justification. No one emerged untouched. For William, the moment marked a turning point, far greater than a single removal. His leadership had revealed its tone firm, calculated, unapologetic when necessary. The future, King had demonstrated that preserving the institution would supersede familial comfort. That message, subtle yet unmistakable, reshaped expectations. The monarchy under his eventual reign would not operate solely on inherited tradition. It would function on controlled precision. Some saw strength in that, others sensed rigidity. Either way, the direction was clearer than ever before. Catherine's influence, once perceived as supportive background, had crystallized into undeniable presence. Behind closed doors, her voice had reinforced discipline and stability. She did not seek the spotlight in the controversy. Yet her alignment with William solidified her role. As more than consort, she was strategic partner. Her calm during turmoil became part of the monarchy's stabilizing narrative. Together, they projected unity at the top, even as uncertainty rippled below. Public trust, though shaken, remained intact for now. The monarchy has always walked a delicate line between mystique and accountability. This episode tested that balance. The lack of transparency invited doubt, yet the decisiveness conveyed control. In times of institutional stress, perception often matters more than explanation. The crown survived this wave not because questions were answered, but because authority was asserted. Still, trust, once strained, requires careful stewardship. And then there is the lingering possibility, the one that refuses to fade. Investigations, especially those conducted in silence, rarely surface entirely at once. What was disclosed internally may not represent the full scope of what was discovered. Whispers persist that additional details remain sealed, protected for the sake of stability. If true, the story is far from over. The monarchy may have drawn a line in the sand, but history has a way of revealing what institutions hope to contain. Beatrice's removal was not an end-in. It was a pivot, a redefinition of boundaries, a signal that no position is beyond scrutiny. Yet it also left behind unresolved emotion, unanswered questions, and a haunting awareness that more could surface. And in a royal family where legacy intertwines with secrecy, that possibility is never insignificant. Because if one removal could shake the monarchy this deeply, what else might still be hidden, waiting to surface? For every answer revealed, another question emerges. The removal of Princess Beatrice wasn't just an ending, it was a warning, a signal that something deeper may still be buried beneath royal tradition. And if this investigation uncovered one truth, how many more remain hidden in silence? The monarchy has always thrived on mystique, on the careful choreography of what is shown and what is withheld. But now, that mystique feels different, sharper, more guarded, because once an institution proves it is willing to cut ties at the highest level, the message travels far beyond one name. Speculation has already begun to circle quietly around other corners of the royal orbit. If compliance reviews can evolve into removal, then who else may be under scrutiny? Which associations are being examined behind closed doors? Which alliances are being quietly reassessed? The palace will never confirm such whispers, yet their very existence signals a shift. The monarchy no longer appears reactive, it appears proactive, preemptive, willing to act before storms fully form. And that willingness changes the atmosphere within its walls. There is strength in decisiveness, but there is also cost. Protecting the institution at all costs demands sacrifice. Sometimes that sacrifice is public popularity, sometimes it is private loyalty, and sometimes, as this chapter revealed, it is a member of the family itself. The line between family and power has never been clean within royal life. Love and hierarchy coexist uneasily. Tradition demands unity, yet authority demands discipline. When those forces collide, something must give. In this case, it was Beatrice's place in the line. Tomorrow, it could be something else entirely. Public fascination has only intensified. Far from closing the story, the decision has widened it. Viewers, commentators, historians, they are not simply asking what happened, they are asking what it means. Does this signal a modern monarchy reshaped by William's firm hand? Does it reflect Catherine's quiet but undeniable influence? Or does it hint at deeper vulnerabilities still hidden beneath ceremonial polish? The crown has survived crises before, but survival often masks transformation, and transformation rarely stops with one bold move. Inside the palace, the silence now feels deliberate, measured, every gesture carefully controlled. Yet silence, as history has shown, does not erase curiosity, it fuels it. Because when power moves without full explanation, imagination fills the gaps, and imagination can be more volatile than fact. The monarchy may project stability, but beneath that projection lies an undeniable tension, an awareness that trust, once shaken, must be continually reinforced. What makes this moment haunting is not just the removal itself, but the precedent it sets. The knowledge that even those born into privilege are no longer untouchable. That leadership is being redefined in real time. That the future king has demonstrated he will not hesitate when he believes the crown is at risk. This is not merely about discipline, it is about direction, and direction shapes destiny. The story, then, does not conclude here. It lingers, it evolves, it waits. Because in institutions built on legacy, every decision casts a shadow longer than expected. And in that shadow, questions continue to grow. And perhaps the most telling truth of all is that in the world of royalty, the biggest secrets are never the ones we see, but the ones we're never meant to discover. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.